The godfather of heavy metal, Ozzy Osbourne, has died. The singer rising to fame as the frontman for Black Sabbath.
Everyone thinks they know how Ozzy Osbourne's story ended. The epic final concert, the sad decline, and the heartbreaking farewell. But get this. That's the story Epic Records wanted you to hear. We've uncovered evidence of secret garage shows on a remote island, sessions so disturbing the label buried them deep. What really happened in Ozzy's final weeks is a nightmare they never wanted exposed. The story everyone believed. Ozzy Osbourne's legendary life was anything but ordinary, but what came after his passing has left even his fiercest fans speechless. They called him the Prince of Darkness, but behind the wild eyes and the infamous stage moments was a man who carried decades of chaos and brilliance. Ozzy, the electrifying frontman who turned heavy metal into a spectacle, passed away at the age of 76. The news came in a solemn statement from his family, who revealed he passed peacefully, surrounded by those he loved most. No official cause was given, but anyone who followed Ozzy's later years knew the heavy toll his body had endured. Though his career was paved with outrageous headlines, it's what supposedly happened just weeks before his death that now cast a haunting shadow over it all. On July 5, 2025, after years of health setbacks, including a rare form of Parkinson's and multiple spinal surgeries, Ozzy stood on stage one last time. It was for the Back to the Beginning farewell concert. It was the first time he had reunited with his original Black Sabbath bandmates since 2005. Despite the years of pain and physical decline, his voice still echoed with that same eerie power. It was meant to be a full-circle moment, one last blaze of glory before retirement. But fewer than 3 weeks later, the silence that followed was deafening. Ozzy's legacy defies simple labels. He was more than the genre he helped create. He was a father, a survivor, and for many, the beating heart of a movement that gave a voice to the strange and the rebellious. Long before reality TV, long before memes, Ozzy was the storm at the center of a cultural shift. And yet, despite the chaos, like his long struggle with substance dependency and a deeply distressing incident in 1989 involving a conflict with Sharon, it was his quiet vulnerability that often revealed the real man. He was a man unraveling beneath the weight of the legend he'd become. This was the official story, the one fed to the public, a neat and tidy ending for a messy, magnificent life. But truth be told, the neat story was starting to fray at the edges, hinting at something much darker hidden just out of sight. The world mourned, but behind the scenes, something felt wrong. The timeline was just too clean. His triumphant final show, a few quiet weeks, and then a peaceful passing. For a life defined by chaos, it was an unnervingly calm ending. The first real crack in the official story appeared not in the tabloids, but in a leaked internal memo from Epic Records. It was a single-page document heavily redacted mentioning a project codenamed Erebus. The memo spoke of asset retrieval and containment protocols from an offshore facility. That facility was only referred to by a set of coordinates. At first, nobody connected it to Ozzy. But then a low-level sound engineer speaking anonymously online posted a frantic message. He claimed the Back to the Beginning concert wasn't the last time Ozzy performed. He mentioned garage sessions and island recordings, saying the tapes were so raw and unsettling that the label locked them away. He described Ozzy as being unlike himself, pushed to his absolute limits in a makeshift studio. His post was deleted within minutes, his account scrubbed from the internet. But it was too late. The whispers had started. Fans began digging. The coordinates from the leaked memo pointed to a small, desolate spit of land in the North Atlantic, a place called Calico Island. It was officially owned by a shell corporation, which, after a dozen layers of corporate trickery, traced back to the parent company of Epic Records. The island wasn't a tropical paradise. It was a jagged rock, often shrouded in fog, with a history as dark as the waters surrounding it. Suddenly, the official narrative of a peaceful end seemed like a carefully constructed play. Why would a record label own a remote, creepy island? And what in the world were the garage shows? The story of Ozzy's final days was no longer about a quiet retirement. It was becoming a mystery, and a terrifying one at that. What was really on that island was a secret so explosive that a multi-billion-dollar corporation was willing to do anything to keep it buried. A secret, desperate project by Epic Records to capture one final, posthumous album from a fading legend. After Ozzy's triumphant but physically draining farewell show, the label executives saw an opportunity. They didn't see a man who needed rest. They saw a brand, an asset, and they feared his voice would be silenced forever before they could cash in one last time. So, they moved him. Under the guise of a private experimental medical retreat to help with his Parkinson's symptoms, Ozzy was flown by private jet to Calico Island. The garage was a cold concrete bunker built into the side of a cliff, originally a Cold War listening post. It was soundproof, isolated, and completely off the grid. Inside, they had set up a state-of-the-art recording studio. There were no thrones, no stage lights, no adoring fans, just cold metal walls, a handful of technicians, and a team of therapists whose job was to keep Ozzy focused and performing. The details that have since leaked from a source close to the project are absolutely chilling. The sessions were grueling, lasting for hours on end. They were not about capturing Ozzy's iconic voice. Instead, they were about provoking a reaction. The therapists allegedly used aggressive psychological techniques, playing him recordings from his past, showing him images of his younger, healthier self, and creating a high-stress environment designed to trigger raw, emotional outbursts. These outbursts, his pained cries and guttural screams, were what they were recording. They weren't making music in the traditional sense, they were mining his pain. The source described the recordings as terrifying to listen to. It was the sound of a man at the end of his rope, confused and exhausted, his legendary roar reduced to something desperate and broken. This was Epic Records' dirty little secret, a project so unethical and ghoulish they knew it could destroy them if it ever came out. They were manufacturing a ghost to sell to the world. And the island they chose for this horrifying project was no accident, because Calico Island had its own dark history of making people disappear. Calico Island, a place of no return. Calico Island wasn't just remote, it was a place with a soul-crushing history. Located hundreds of miles off the coast of Newfoundland, it was a place sailors actively avoided. Local legends called it the Isle of Whispers, a place where the wind carried the voices of those lost to the sea. For centuries it was uninhabited, a barren rock battered by storms for 10 months out of the year. Its only structures were a crumbling lighthouse and the remnants of a small failed fishing settlement from the 1800s, whose inhabitants all vanished without a trace one winter. In the 1960s, the island's history took an even darker turn. The military secretly purchased it and built the underground bunker that would later become Ozzy's recording prison. It was a listening station designed to track Soviet submarines. But according to declassified documents, it was also used for something far more sinister: psychological experiments on isolated soldiers, studying the effects of extreme sensory deprivation and stress. The program was shut down after just 3 years due to multiple breakdowns and what was only described as unrecoverable psychological damage to its subjects. When Epic Records' parent company bought the island in the early 2000s, they listed its purpose as a private executive retreat. But no executive ever went there. Instead, it became a dumping ground for the industry's toughest problems. Artists with severe substance dependency issues, stars on the verge of a public meltdown. They were sent to Calico Island to dry out, far from the eyes of the media. But there were rumors that not everyone who went to the island came back the same. Some returned quiet and hollowed out, their creative spark gone. Others simply faded from the public eye altogether. The island was a place where problems were solved and people were silenced. The air itself felt heavy, and the few staff members who worked there were bound by ironclad non-disclosure agreements. They knew that what happened on Calico Island stayed on Calico Island. For Epic Records, it was the perfect place to hide a legend and bleed him dry, knowing the island's grim reputation would swallow any secrets whole. But they made one mistake. They couldn't control what happened to Ozzy's body, and the truth was about to be written in the coroner's final report. When the world thought it had made peace with Ozzy's passing, the official autopsy report surfaced through a leak, and what it revealed was darker and more haunting than anyone was prepared for. This wasn't just a medical document. It was a final testament written in the language of science, and it told a story of pure horror. While the documented cause of death, respiratory decline tied to Parkinson's disease, aligned with the public story, the finer details painted a different, horrifying picture. It was a story that pointed directly back to the cold concrete walls of the garage on Calico Island. Hidden within the sterile medical language was irrefutable evidence of extreme stress and physical duress in his final weeks. The report noted significant capillary hemorrhaging on his vocal cords. Let's be clear, this wasn't the kind of strain from singing. This was damage from prolonged, forceful, and agonizing screaming. It was the physical proof of the label's twisted method, provoking raw outbursts instead of capturing music. But that's not even the worst part. The toxicology report was a chemical nightmare. There were traces of heavy sedatives in his system, but alongside them were high levels of powerful stimulants, a dangerous combination that no responsible doctor would ever prescribe. It was a chemical cocktail designed to keep a person agitated, awake, and on edge, even when their body was screaming for rest. This was a perfect match for the insider's story of the label, pushing him to perform through sheer manufactured exhaustion. The physical descriptions were even more jarring. The report detailed severe dehydration and advanced malnutrition. Ozzy had lost a shocking amount of weight in a very short period. His body was, in simple terms, shutting down from being run into the ground. But get this, the coroner also noted multiple stress fractures in the bones of his hands, along with deep, unusual calluses across his knuckles. His fingernails were broken and worn down to the quick. This wasn't a man who passed peacefully. This was a man who had been beating his fists against a wall, clawing for a way out, trapped and desperate in his final days. The neurological section further confirmed that the extreme stress had rapidly accelerated his Parkinson's symptoms, turning his decline into a free fall. And then came the single most damning piece of evidence, the one thing the label's cleanup crew on the island somehow missed. In their arrogant rush to scrub the scene clean, they overlooked a tiny, desperate act of defiance. Tucked away deep inside the torn lining of his jacket was a small, crumpled piece of sheet music, folded over and over into a tight square. You can almost picture his hands shaking from his illness and the sheer terror of it all, fumbling to hide this one last message to the world. On the stained paper, there were no musical notes. Instead, written in a spidery, barely legible hand, were words that shattered the official story forever. Not a garage, a cage. Let me go home. It wasn't a song lyric. It was a desperate plea from a man stripped of his dignity. This note was his final testament, a confirmation of the horrors he endured. The Prince of Darkness hadn't gone out in a blaze of glory surrounded by fans, celebrated and revered. He had been extinguished in a cold, dark room, his final pained roars captured on tape for profit. The garage shows were real, and as this heartbreaking note proves, they cost him absolutely everything. In the hunger for more content, are we sacrificing the very humanity of the artists we claim to love? Let us know your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more hidden stories.